Who was the nicest male celebrity you've met? I ran into Adam Sandler outside of a Planet Fitness in Brooklyn in early 2016. As I was leaving the Planet Fitness, it looked like he was walking in. We made eye contact, so I stopped and held the door for him. He got to the door and stopped right before he walked through, in one of those fake poses that little kids make when you tell them to freeze. I stood there holding the door, plenty confused. For about 5 seconds, we just stood there, him motionless and I standing there holding the door. Finally, he turned his head and said in the stereotypical Adam Sandler voice, "Who we kidding? I'm not going in there." Giant grin on his face. We both laughed, and then he continued down the street. Awesome. Met John Candy on a plane when I was a little kid while traveling with my family. He was a big man. He had the whole row to himself in front of us with the armrest up between seats so he could be more comfortable. The stewardesses were blocking anyone from coming up and bothering him, even though they themselves were not exactly leaving him alone, what with talking to him constantly and laughing at his enjoyable banter the whole trip. At some point he got up to go to the bathroom. When he came back he looked at me, pretended to do a double take, like he was surprised and said, "Hey, you're the quietest kid ever, don't you talk?" The way he said it was so friendly that I just smiled and giggled. Then he had a pleasant conversation with my parents, who had been so excited to talk to him the entire flight, but were too polite to bother him. Not even 2 weeks later we heard he had passed. Mom spotted Robin Williams once, and she went up to him and asked if she could get a quick photo. She didn't realize he was there in the middle or about to do something with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, so she waited until they were done around 20-30 minutes later, and then a bunch of the kids and people wanted photos with him. He made it a point to stick around and told his staff I think that woman wanted a photo and made sure she got it. Mom was thrilled. He was such a humble, nice dude. Working in a little boutique store in Seattle with my girlfriend, and it was a particularly slow day when all of a sudden Robin Williams walks through the door. He was the only one in the store and my girlfriend didn't know who he was. We left him alone, and when he came up to purchase his things he started barking at my Boston Terrier in a cute way. It scared the crap out of my Boston Terrier and he started barking back at Robin. He was so genuine and nice, and I really do remember how hairy his arms were. For some reason, that really stuck out. He walked out the door and instantly was surrounded by a bunch of tourists trying to take pictures of him. He put his bags in the back of his Mini Cooper and drove off. He bought a little piece of artwork and 3 Gorin Brothers hats. I met Paul Rudd on a flight from New York, sat next to him on the plane. My buddy leaned over and told me that he wanted to compliment him on this band shirt he wore when making Clueless, but he didn't want it to be weird. So his solution was to write him a note and slip it to him, lol. So he does this, and Paul just gets this nervous look on his face, opens the note and reads it, starts cracking up laughing, leaned over to us, and said best note ever. He then told us the whole story of the shirt, how he fought with the costume dept about it, because it was the shirt he wore to set that day. We talked the whole flight, dude was super cool. Edit, band is Trip Shakespeare. I have a fun Paul Rudd story. I worked at CVS at the time, and my manager had just eliminated smoke breaks, so I'm on edge and going nuts. Paul Rudd walks in and sees me. For reference, I'm generally disheveled in appearance. I had a wizard beard braided down almost to my nuts, and I had worked overnight unloading the truck before popping on register. He looks at me and just goes, "Rough night." I laughed, nodded. I slept at my coffee, which was more or less empty at this point. My boss comes out of the office to yell at me about something, and Paul drops what he's doing, runs to my counter, and rings the little bell to interrupt the boss. I run over, and he has a single butterfinger on the counter. I ring him out, and he laughs. He says, "How long you been here?" Truthfully, I told him 10 hours. I sputter something about loving him in fundamentals of caring. He looks at my boss and says the best thing ever. I need my name to help me to my car with my purchase. My back hurts. Mind taking over for him? So I go outside. He bums a cigarette off me and bought me coffee, then wouldn't let me inside until I finished a whole cigarette and half my coffee. Boss got angry. He laughs and says I still need his help loading my car. Honestly, it's actually probably the single best customer moment I've ever had in my time in retail. Dude's got him awesome. Mom and sister met The Rock when he was still a wrestler. They had a couple car seats and tons of bags, having a hell of a time getting off the plane, and people were waiting. And then this massive guy offered to carry some things for them, and they happily took the help. He grabbed some bags and held the baby carrier with my niece in it and helped them off the plane and left. After, people kept going up to them asking how they knew The Rock, and they were very confused until someone explained who he was. Everything I ever hear about Rock, he's super cool. He did a rap from Moana with some dude interviewing him for The Guy's Kids, because The Guy's Kids were massive Moana fans. I reckon he's so nice that on the airplane, I bet you, he let the person next to him have the armrest. He probably thought this isn't The Rock's elbow room. This is the people's elbow room. At the street. Bernard dog from Beethoven at Planet Hollywood when I was a kid. Seemed like a pretty nice dog in person. I met Vin Diesel at a truck stop diner when I was a kid. It was like 4 in the morning and me, my grandpa and Vin and his friend were the only ones in the diner, and we ended up getting sat at the table next to them. Vin and a friend were getting ready to go on some fishing trip, which was made obvious by the clothes they were wearing. My grandpa struck up a conversation about fishing with him, completely oblivious to who he was. He was a really nice guy and apparently knew a great deal about fishing techniques. I was a bit cheeked out and didn't say much or contribute to the conversation, but I spent the next hour of our road trip explaining to my grandpa who Vin Diesel was and why it was a huge deal we just met him. Dave Chappelle a few years back. Long story short, a friend of a friend got me and 2 friends into an after party. We were sitting at the bar when his manager offered us some shots. We talked with his manager for a while. Then Dave sat down near us. Dave was kind of sitting by himself, and he looks over at us and goes, "What's going on, fellas?" And we talked to him for about an hour. We thanked him for coming to our town. Talked about music, sports, all kinds of stuff. Super cool dude. One of my favorite memories. Jim Carrey, when I was like 11 at a party my parents attended. I couldn't stop staring at him. He was behaving so normal, and then when he noticed me staring, he did a masked facial expression and started staring at me. He's a genuinely funny guy and probably has the purest of heart. Stephen Fry was absolutely delightful. Charming, chatty, got my name wrong once at the beginning of the evening and kept apologizing for it over the course of the night. Thanks. Absolutely nice. I met him when I worked at In-N-Out Burger a few years back. I took an order to his table and was startled when I saw his, and I asked, "Are you Tom Hanks?" And he looks up from his meal, gives the biggest friendliest smile, and says, "You betcha." When I'm clocking out and leaving, he's heading out exactly as I am. So I hold the door open for him and he greets me with a thank you. And as he and his son are walking away, I say, "Mr. Hanks, if it's not any trouble, could I possibly take a picture with you?" He turns around with another big grin and says, "Walk with me, kid." So we talked for about 10 minutes. He asked me about my life, told him all of my favorite movies he is in. He gave me some life advice, and his son, very nice but just quiet, took some pictures of us. He gave me a handshake followed by a hug, saying it was nice to meet me. I said, "I'm glad the most famous person I got to meet was you." Then they left. Needless to say, my co-workers stared through the windows the entire time and then hounded me for a week about it. Jeffrin is the nicest guy in the world. I met him at a New Year's house party in LA. I asked him about his workout regime for Neighbors, and he was so happy to talk to me. I honestly felt so comfortable talking to him. I could have asked him to get me a drink at the bar and I think he would have done it. In the end, I told him he was the nicest celebrity I have ever met. He looked at me and said, "Hey man, real recognize is real." Met Matthew Lillard, his wife, and newborn daughter like literally after the release of the first Scooby-Doo movie. My family always host 4th of July parties in our beach house, and he party crashed. I was like 7 or 8 at the time and my cousins were freaking out saying Shaggy is here. Of course I immediately sprinted over and he was eating a hot dog. Super cliche I know, since it's the 4th of July lol. He was so cool. The whole time he was in character and offering me to have him go get a hot dog for me. I remember my little cousins asking where Scooby was at and he replied, "Oh, Scoobs ate so many hot dogs that he's like having a food coma." Seriously, one of most highlighted memory dating back to my youth. Tell your story in comments and subscribe.